Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me here on the new Conversations with Alan channel for the 18th episode of the series. I'm Alan Locker. I created Conversations with Alan to have open and honest discussions about the rise of hate and the rise of anti-Semitism, with high hopes that it leads to conversations that make us all think about our own place in history and what we can do to change our country's course to stop hate in all its forms. I'm really excited to welcome Matthew E. Berger here tonight. He is the executive director of the Foundation to Combat Antisemitism. As director, he oversees the foundation's programs to raise awareness about hatred against Jews and to monitor and analyze anti-Semitism on social media. He is leading the foundation's launch of the Stand Up to Jewish Hate campaign, a multi-platform advertising campaign to educate non-Jews about modern anti-Semitism and empower them to address hate in their own communities. I hope you have all seen the campaign, which has introduced the blue square, the blue emoji square, like I'm wearing tonight, as the national symbol for addressing anti-Semitism, encouraging people everywhere to speak out against intolerance. Matthew's previous work at Hillel International and now with the Foundation to Combat Antisemitism allows him the opportunity to use his communications and marketing experience to help solve big problems for the Jewish community. He believes we need to look at new, innovative ways to raise awareness about anti-Semitism and empower Jews and non-Jews to fight intolerance and hatred. It is my pleasure to welcome Matthew Berger to Conversations with Alan.
Thanks, Alan.
Hey, Matthew.
Thanks, Alan. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. There's so much to get to tonight, but I really wanted to start with a story that just disturbed me that I read on the Stand Up to Jewish Hate Instagram page on Friday. The FBI has launched a hate crime investigation after a student with autism had a swastika carved into his back. Is there any update on that? Do you know?
I've been talking to leaders in the Las Vegas Jewish community. This occurred in Las Vegas. I've been talking to leaders of the community. They're working with the family. They're working with the school and obviously with investigators to understand what happened. There's complexity because the student has autism, is nonverbal, and that makes investigating it more difficult. But to me, this incident really shows us that there's an education challenge in our society, that we are not teaching our students, our young people, what anti-Semitism is, what these symbols mean, and we're allowing a culture that really doesn't address anti-Semitism and hate towards Jews the way that we address issues targeting other communities in our society. And that's a major reason why we have launched this campaign, why we're so focused on being in the face and teaching people outside the Jewish community what anti-Semitism looks like today. Because one of the biggest responses that we get from people who see our ads is, I didn't know this was a problem, or I don't think it's a problem. There's an awareness issue right now. People don't realize that anti-Semitism is happening today. And that's a large part of why we're doing what we're doing.
Wow. You know, I think there are things that really can't surprise me anymore. That was heartbreaking to me. Having a cousin with autism, having friends with, who have children with autism, there's no excuse to that. For those who might be watching, the definition that the foundation uses for anti-Semitism.
It's hate and intolerance and targeting of Jews for being Jews. It's any time that Jews are being isolated, ostracized, made to be set apart from others in our society. And anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred. It's been around for centuries. It's been around for, really since the beginning of time. And it's usually manifests in a way in which Jews are scapegoated or being made to be held responsible for whatever is seen as problematic in a society. And oftentimes, anti-Semitism is different from other forms of hatred because Jews are targeted It's known as punching up. That Jews are targeted as being more successful or devious or doing things that are keeping other people down, whereas other minorities and other groups are kept down and are seen as being targeted to prevent them from aspiring. The anti-Semitism and the targeting that happens to Jews is more about power and control, and the idea that Jewish conspiracies are behind things that people have problems with or don't like in their own communities.
I'm curious, do you remember learning about it as a child, or how was it introduced to you? What's your earliest memory?
I was incredibly fortunate to grow up in a community with a large Jewish population. I grew up in Westchester County, New York. And then I went to school in Washington, D.C. at George Washington University, which also had a large, thriving Jewish community. So anti-Semitism didn't really personally hit me for a very long period of time. And that was also in a moment where really anti-Semitism had waned. And there wasn't, a lot of in-your-face anti-Semitism in our communities. It wasn't until after I graduated college when I started engaging with people outside of the Jewish world more. I always had non-Jewish friends, but the non-Jewish friends I had knew a lot of Jews and understood Jewish customs and understood what Judaism was. But when I branched out more and when I met different types of people, I started to meet people who had innocent misconceptions. I would hear from people, that they had heard about Jews having horns or Jews, Jews killed Christ or whatever those types of things were. That's when I started to recognize that this was a problem. It was innocuous, really. It wasn't that people were trying to target me. It wasn't that people were trying to be malicious. It was an accepted form of teasing. It was an accepted form of misinformation.
That's the teasing is resonates really with me. Like I grew up in New Jersey. I did not grow up, or I do not believe I grew up in a large Jewish community. And, I always knew my parents were Holocaust survivors for sure. But for some reason, I have these memories that I keep talking about, that when people would ask what nationality or religion I was, I never came out and said I was Jewish. And I think it's due to that teasing. I think because I had dark hair, I looked Spanish, and Italian, and that's what I would always get. And I think that made me feel much more comfortable because it was much more of the community I was in. Most of my friends went to Catholic school. So it's interesting that, but I do think, like, I was a teenager in the 80s. I think that lack of education back then and teasing probably is what really made my comfort level, not a large comfort level in the community.
Yeah, I will be the first to say that I have not experienced anti-Semitism as much as other people, but I have grown through my professional work to engage with so many people who have, whether it's Holocaust survivors at one extreme, or people who have been targeted for their connection to Israel, or people who have been targeted just for being Jewish on college campuses or in communities, that I've really grown to recognize that this is a problem that that Jews see on a regular basis, but is largely unnoticed in society. And in working to develop this campaign, we were really surprised to see the research that showed that more than half of Americans don't think that anti-Semitism is a problem right now. That shows us that there's an awareness issue. We don't believe that the vast majority of people are maliciously trying to target the Jewish community. We just believe that they don't understand that what they're doing and what they're saying is anti-Semitic, and that if they take action, if they care about this issue, there are small things that they can do to change their behavior, to change the way they talk about things, that will be respectful and will address some types of anti-Semitism and minimize those sort of passive anti-Semitic incidents that we see in our communities.
It's crazy. You will celebrate 1 year next month or in June.
Yeah.
at the foundation to combat anti-Semitism. What drew you to this new role and this organization in particular?
It's a great question. For the last 7 years, had been working for Hill International. I joined Hillel after working in journalism and in crisis communications, and joined Hillel to run their communications. We have a specific focus on addressing anti-Semitism and anti-Israel issues on college campuses. And I loved the job. It was an incredibly rewarding experience to be working with dedicated professionals and really exciting students who loved being on a college campus and loved expressing their Judaism and drawing people to that work. This was an incredibly unique opportunity to work with the Kraft family, to work with Mr. Kraft directly, to see what happens when you look at an issue like anti-Semitism and try something differently, try something with additional resources, do something in a new way. And what the Kraft family said to me was they've really determined that nobody has had the ability or the wherewithal to address anti-Semitism at scale, specifically targeting non-Jews and specifically trying to raise the decibel level of this issue as a national priority. And that was a unique challenge for me. And so, as much as I would love to say that working, in an NFL stadium is what really drew me to this work, that certainly was a great benefit. It was the challenge. It was the challenge of really trying to do something big and exciting and raise awareness about this issue at scale.
That's great. And we will talk more about that. You've said it a few times. The anti-Israel conversation. Can you elaborate on that and how that plays? Because I think you just said on college campuses.
Anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are two different but intersecting issues. Anti-Semitism is the targeting of Jews for being Jews. Anti-Zionism is targeting people for supporting or having a connection to Israel as the Jewish state. You rarely have anti-Zionism that isn't anti-Semitic, but you can have anti-Semitism that isn't anti-Zionist. And what we have seen is that people who have legitimate criticism of Israel can then devolve into criticism of Israel as the Jewish homeland, which then can devolve into the targeting of American Jews for having a relationship or a connection with Israel. And that's where it becomes really problematic and anti-Semitic. The idea that if you are a Jew in the United States, you are somehow responsible for or should be blamed for the policy positions and the actions that are being taken by another country. Well, that's problematic, and that's targeting, on its face. And that's the idea of dual loyalty, and that's the idea of other anti-Semitic tropes. We don't blame Russian Americans for the policies of the Russian government. We don't blame people who come to the United States from any country seeking a better life for the policies of the countries that they've left. But yet somehow, not just Israelis, but American Jews are oftentimes held to account for the actions of the Israeli government.
It's crazy. It makes me think a little of 9/11 and how, I think different communities were blamed, for what was happening in our country.
Yes, there's certainly aspects of that. The work that we are focused on is really about talking about the experiences of American Jews and making clear that the anti-Semitism that we're focused on is the impact that it has on American Jews. And the source of that anti-Semitism can be from a multitude of directions. Unfortunately, there are multiple factors that are contributing to anti-Semitism in our communities and our society today. But what we want to show through our advertising and for our campaign is that no matter the source, American Jews are being targeted. They're being isolated. And that's something that's unacceptable. And we really want to bring people along with us in the conversation about how do we address anti-Semitism when we see it.
I mean, education, conversations, all of that is how we change things. Um, you've mentioned Robert Kraft. He is the CEO of the New England Patriots. He started the foundation. Um, where did his, idea for this come from? Was there something that he had seen, or was it, facts?
Robert is a philanthropist who has really, for decades, been focused on addressing injustices that he has seen in society. He is a leading advocate for sentencing reform and the racial disparities in prison sentencing. He's advocated for the LGBTQ community and was the first team owner to file a brief in support of same-sex marriage. He has worked to address disparities along racial lines in healthcare in Boston and in Massachusetts. And what Robert really came to recognize was that there was in his own community a new challenge, and that the future of the Jewish community was at risk because of the rise of anti-Semitism. And so in 2019, Robert received the Genesis Prize, which is an award given each year to a Jewish business or community leader. And it comes with $1 million for that person to distribute for programs and organizations that support the Jewish community.
Wow.
Robert took that $1 million and added $20 million of his own money and sought support from additional friends and community leaders, and developed the Foundation to Combat Antisemitism, because he really believed that this is a fundamental threat to the future of the Jewish community. And so the organization was founded in 2019, and it's housed inside the stadium. And we're really focused on learning what anti-Semitism is, specifically how it manifests on social media today, and how we can be innovative and creative with partners and with like-minded organizations to tackle the problem in new and creative ways.
Wow. How involved is he?
He is incredibly involved. My office is steps away from his, and he pops into my office multiple times a day. This is his legacy. And and the family is incredibly involved in this program. They have really been the inspiration for the work that we're doing, and he really sees this as something that he needs to be centrally focused on. And he has committed his resources, committed his time, and he is an incredible partner for us in this program.
Eternally grateful, because it is at a time where we desperately need it. So thank you, Mr. Kraft. You've talked about part of your role is to monitor and analyze anti-Semitism on social media. How do you go about doing that, and talk about what you're seeing on social media?
Sure. We actually have a command center inside our offices in which we are monitoring and analyzing social media and different trends around hate speech and anti-Semitism in a real-time basis. And so when you walk into our office, there are giant monitors that are looking at different social media posts, different hashtags, different terms, and we're able to look in real time as to what is happening, and able to relay that information to partners, to social media influencers, to people who are really on the front lines of addressing anti-Semitism on the ground. And what we use is a technology that's designed to monitor brands. If you work for Coca-Cola, you want to know every time that Coca-Cola is talked about on social media. You also want to know every time that Pepsi-Cola is talked about on social media. And so we've taken that technology and turned it into a source for monitoring anti-Semitism. We have keywords and specific accounts that we monitor and look at, so that we're able to see what conversations are trending, what terms are being used, and we provide that information to allies and to partners, so that they can better, in the moment, really assess and respond to anti-Semitism that we're seeing on social media channels.
And we know from the media coverage, in the last 6 months to a year, about the threats. I mean, there have been multiple threats, where the FBI has even been involved.
we know that anti-Semitism and hate on social media, when it goes unchecked, can, metastasize into real world hatred, real world attacks on Jews. All of the major anti-Semitic incidents that we have seen over the last few years, there has been a trail of anti-Semitic activity on social media before it turned into something physical. And what happens is hate finds friends on social media. If you are somebody in your basement, the stereotypical lone wolf person, who is writing hateful things on social media, you find people who encourage you, who are like-minded, who tell you to do more, that you're right, and that has an impact. When somebody is spewing hate and they're getting rewarded for it and they're getting, appreciation for it, no matter who it's from, it can be intoxicating, and it can drive people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And so we know that when you don't respond, when you don't, address hate that comes on social media, it can lead to real anti-Semitism and real anti-Semitic activity in our communities.
You are launching or helped launch on March 27th the Stand Up to Jewish Hate campaign. Can you talk about the genesis for this particular campaign and, some of the partners and take it away?
Sure. So the campaign started with a advertising agency. We brought in several advertising agencies and said, we need to think differently, we need to be creative. And one of the agencies came to us with the blue square and said, we need to use the blue square and show and create a national symbol and a national identity for fighting anti-Semitism. So the same way that you see a rainbow flag and you know that that person or that business or that organization cares about LGBTQ issues, the blue square can be the national symbol for fighting anti-Semitism. And when you see the blue square in the media, it often takes up 2.4% of the screen to show that the Jewish community is only 2.4% of the US population, yet it grows to be 55% of the screen to show that Jews are the victims of 55% of religious-based hate crimes in the United States. And that contrast is really striking. We want people to understand that Jews are a small minority in our country, yet are the victims of a majority of the religious-based hate. And getting that message across has been the cornerstone of this campaign. We've launched it on television. It's in addition to the campaign introducing the blue square, we created 3 commercials. We worked with Derek C. in France, who is a award-winning feature film and a commercial director, and each of the commercials showcases what anti-Semitism looks like today, how people are exposed to hate and to toxicity in their communities and on social media. And what's unique about our campaign is that each of the commercials focuses on the role of somebody outside the Jewish community who sees anti-Semitism and takes action. Because what we are trying to do is really speak to those outside the Jewish community and say, there is a role for you to play. And that the same way that you would address racism if you saw it, or gender inequality, or AAPI hate, or LGBTQ hate, or homophobia, if you saw that, you would take action. Anti-Semitism needs the same type of action. And one of the research findings that we had was that more than half of Americans believe that Jews could solve anti-Semitism by ourselves. Yet we're only 2% of the US population. And so what we're trying to do is raise awareness that we need all Americans to stand with us and support the fight against anti-Semitism. And we've been incredibly heartened that this campaign has included and we've gotten support from a wide range of non-Jewish organizations that have come to the table, that are sharing our message, because there's a growing recognition right now that anti-Semitism is a problem, and that if you care about racism, if you care about gender inequality, if you care about any of these injustices, you have to care about anti-Semitism too. It's part of the same conversation. And that's really the message that we're trying to send to people, that this is so similar to a lot of the other hate that we see in our communities, and it needs to be tackled with the same force and with the same resolve.
Well, and I love that you're targeting outside of the Jewish community. And when I hear that, you know, you and I wouldn't be having this conversation if it wasn't for the non-Jewish community that saved my mother and father. You know,
Absolutely.
it took brave men and women to save, you know, my family and hundreds, if not thousands of others during the war. And, you know, we need allies.
We do. And there is a moment of growing recognition that anti-Semitism is something that needs to be in our collective consciousness. And we're trying to elevate that conversation. And we're trying to build allies for us. We're trying to do it in a way that is very very collective. You know, we want organizations to recognize that the same people that are targeting Jews with anti-Semitism, by and large, are the same people targeting blacks with racism, targeting the LGBTQ community, targeting the Hispanic community. It's the same type of hate, and if it goes unchecked, it doesn't stop with anti-Semitism. And so we all are in this together, and we need to work together to solve all hatred against all communities. And that's something that Robert and the Kraft family feel very strongly about, and that's a real cornerstone of our work.
And tomorrow will be a month since you launched. Um, any surprises for you? You know, how do you feel it's being perceived at this month mark?
We have been incredibly heartened by the response that we've gotten, both inside the Jewish community, people saying to us that this is exactly the kind of message that they've been wanting to hear, that they feel that nobody has really been speaking up for them, and that this campaign does that. And most surprisingly, the number of people who've come to us and said one of our commercials felt like something that they had experienced. And oftentimes, Jews are scared, reluctant to speak out about anti-Semitism that they face, for fear of being targeted, for fear of it being seen as not worthy of a response. And so we are sort of lifting a veil to a type of hatred that often doesn't get recognized and doesn't get responded to. So in addition to the great response we've gotten from the Jewish community, we have partners across the United States, Jewish organizations and Jewish federations that are working with us. The organizations outside the Jewish community that have really shared our message to their networks has been the most inspiring. The National PTA, the National Association of Evangelicals, the Urban League, the Unidos, the the Hispanic group, or LGBTQ groups, the number of organizations that are taking a moment to share with their community what anti-Semitism is, what it looks like, and empower their community to address it has been really the most satisfying part of the work, because we need to build allies. We need to develop relationships where we're working and looking out for one another. And this campaign has really brought a lot of partners to the table.
Incredible. I just want to mention I have the link on the YouTube page. If anybody wants to get one of these squares, you can do so below. I'm going to play.
We've had over more than 100,000 pins have been ordered.
That's amazing. Wow. That's amazing. That's great. I'm going to play a clip from Robert, and then we'll talk more about what he has to say.
Great.
Most disturbing trend is the recent studies done around young Americans, 18 to 29, is this lack of proper education has gone the other way, and there is more anti-Semitism coming towards this group. And it's really starting on the college campuses by uneducated people or people who are filled with vitriol and hatred, and getting young people at a young age, and then these tropes are just sort of accepted.
It's crazy. Talk about the lack of education and how that plays a part.
We've seen statistics that show that the number of American young people who don't know what the Holocaust was, that don't know that 6 million Jews were killed, some who even believe that Jews were responsible for the Holocaust. There is a lack of understanding of what happens when hate goes unchecked and unchallenged. And we have got into a position in our community where we have left the Jewish community and anti-Semitism behind in the conversations around equal justice and fair treatment. When I talk to friends who work in college campuses, the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that's being done on college campuses, that's being done in Fortune 500 companies, by and large, doesn't include anti-Semitism or the Jewish community as part of those curriculum or part of those work. So when you have Jews being targeted in college campuses, in communities, in schools, at the workplace, and the resources that are established to support people who are being victimized, those resources aren't recognizing you and your community as part of that work. That's a problem. And that creates an environment where you feel doubly isolated and you feel that you don't know where to go to address what is happening. And so that's why you see a lot of the anti-Semitism not get reported. That's why you see the anti-Semitism that does get reported not be followed up and not be addressed. We need to change the culture in which we're teaching people from a young age through adulthood that anti-Semitism is real, that it's impacting people today, and that it's incumbent on all of us to address it.
For those watching, people at home, what recommendations would you give, for educating yourself, and what else can they do to help support the Stand Up to Jewish Hate campaign?
The first things first is go to standuptojewishhate.org. There are resources there to learn about what anti-Semitism is, how it's manifested over generations and centuries, what anti-Semitism looks like today, the startling statistics, and how you can be part of the community that is addressing anti-Semitism. We encourage everybody to post and share the blue square to express your solidarity with the Jewish community and to say that you are part of the commitment to fighting anti-Semitism. It's an emoji that already exists on people's phones, and we want people to use that, put it on their social media feed. We just saw people who are posting it on their profile. We want people to be using it and sharing their story. Are you a victim of anti-Semitism? Are you a victim of other hate and therefore understand, what happens when anti-Semitism and hate goes unchecked? Are you somebody who's an ally or a friend or has a relationship or wants to learn more? We want everybody to really speak up and say that, and to educate their community that anti-Semitism isn't something that can be ignored anymore, and that it's incumbent on all of us to address it.
The speaking up, like I said, I really didn't talk about it prior to witnessing Charlottesville with my own eyes, and knowing what my parents lived through during the war, just even their mental states because of that.
Yeah.
I feel like I have to use my voice where they no longer can. That I think Charlottesville and those incidences, the Tree of Life, would have sent my mom under a rock, and Jewish people should not be afraid to live their lives here in the United States in 2023.
Those are all incredibly devastating incidents in which we have galvanized as a community against anti-Semitism, and non-Jews have come with us. But we know that that support fades, and we have to recognize that anti-Semitism isn't just the heinous murder of Jews. It comes in microaggressions, and it comes in social media taunting and bullying, and it comes in the form of harassment in schools and in workplace. And until we address that at its core, we're not going to address the metastasized anti-Semitism that you're speaking of in those major heinous incidents. And so we really need to address the minor incidents and address the mindset that lets people think that it's okay to be anti-Semitic, that allows it to go unchallenged and allows it to become problematic.
It's fascinating, and it's such a multi-layered, complex issue. How long will this exact Blue Square campaign run for?
Well, the current advertising that you're seeing will run through the end of May. Our goal with the Blue Square campaign is for it to live well beyond that. We want to use the messaging and the brand that we're building to really do several things. First, to dive deeper into the audiences where we believe there are unique challenges and unique opportunities. There's a lot of research as to where anti-Semitism is coming from, where it's growing. We want to target our advertising and target our engagement to impact those communities. We also know where our best allies are and who we can mobilize to work with us. We want to target those communities. And we want to be responsive to where anti-Semitism is. Excuse me. We want to go into communities that are experiencing anti-Semitism and use the Blue Square, use the language of stand up to Jewish hate to respond to hate. The same way that if there is a homophobic incident, the gay pride flags, the rainbow flags come out the next day. We want the message of stand up to Jewish hate to be how our community and our allies respond to anti-Semitism.
I put out the pride flag in June. I need to get a big stand up to Jewish hate flag now with the Blue Square.
Well, what I'll tell you is May is the start of Jewish American Heritage Month. And we're encouraging everybody to use Jewish American Heritage Month as an opportunity to stand up to Jewish hate and share the Blue Square. That, a lot of people don't know about Jewish American Heritage Month. And the same way that when we talk about Women's History Month, we use it as an opportunity to address, continued gender inequality. Or when we talk about Black History Month, we talk about systemic racism and how racial injustice continues in our society. We want to use Jewish American Heritage Month as a moment for people to say, I'm recognizing the Jewish community, I'm recognizing what it's achieved, and I'm recognizing the threat that still exists through anti-Semitism, and recommitting to stand up to Jewish hate.
That's great. You just returned from 3 days in Poland with Robert Kraft, where you joined the March of the Living. For those at home, can you tell us what that was and what was it like for you to be there with him?
Yeah, it was fascinating. The March of the Living is an annual march that draws about 10,000 people, mostly young people, to Poland to march from Auschwitz to from one concentration camp to another, essentially within the Auschwitz grounds, to commemorate the death marches that Jews were forced to be put upon during the Holocaust, and in which many Jews died before they even made it to concentration camps to either be put into work or to die in death chambers. It was a fascinating experience for several reasons. A, just being there and being on the ground where such hatred existed and where Jews were systemically killed in such a way is just horrifying, and you feel that in your bones when you step through those walls. Also, we traveled with Meek Mill, who is a rapper and an artist who has developed a strong relationship with Robert, and seeing it through his eyes and seeing it through somebody who in the Black community who um, understands a different type of discrimination and targeting and injustice, and talking to him about the parallels and how hate goes unchecked in our respective communities and what it leads to was really fascinating. And Meek has become a real ally and somebody who can is working with us to build Black Jewish relations around these issues, both racism and anti-Semitism. And so seeing the march through his perspective was really fascinating. And then the third layer is the young people, seeing these young people getting educated, understanding this issue, and recommitting themselves. Many of them have already know about it, but recommitting themselves to speak out about this and to make sure that generations understand what the Holocaust was and understand how to live the idea of never again. All of that was incredibly moving and incredibly powerful. We were also there at the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and seeing the images and learning about the largest uprising of Jews during the Holocaust was also incredibly moving. So there's nothing like this experience. It was incredibly powerful. And
was it all three of your first time there? I know yours.
It was my first time. I'd been to concentration camps before, but I'd never been to Auschwitz. So that was an incredibly moving experience. It was definitely Meek's first time. I'm not sure whether it was Robert's, but being there in that capacity with the March of the Living, it was certainly his first March of the Living. Being there in that moment, marching with 10,000 people, all committing ourselves to remembering the Holocaust and to fighting anti-Semitism, that was extremely powerful.
I would like to do that. Is there footage of all of you there and talking to him, about this experience?
Yeah, we were fortunate that two anchors from CNN, Wolf Blitzer and Dana Bash, both traveled with us. And Dana interviewed Robert and Meek, and Wolf talked at length about his own family's experience. His grandparents were killed at Auschwitz, and so having their personal stories was really, really powerful. Dana is the grandchild of survivors as well. That those stories were incredibly powerful, and also we were fortunate that they were able to document our experience and share it with their audience.
Oh, I'm gonna find that. You and I are living in a time we're both gay, we're both Jewish. Your thoughts on and it's interesting because a lot throughout our conversation tonight you talked about allies, and that's I think as as gay men we always hear about how we need allies, so, and I just keep thinking of that every time you said it.
Yeah, I draw a lot of inspiration from the LGBTQ community and the progress that our community has made over the last, I'm in my mid 40s. So over the last, 30 years that I've really been watching it, and an understanding of where we need to go. When I think about microaggressions and I think about the taunting of Jews and the words that people use to to put Jews down, I think about words like queer and fag that a generation ago were commonplace on the schoolyard, but yet education and teaching people that those words had meaning, and that there were victims when you use those words, that they weren't that they weren't innocent, when over time, as we educated people, we impacted change. And I, believe, look, it's not perfect, but I believe those words aren't being used the same way they were a couple of generations ago. And I draw a lot of inspiration from that. I think that people, if they're taught that the words they use and the actions they take have an impact, they make smarter choices. And so, not everybody, obviously, but the vast majority do. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from what I've seen in the LGBTQ community. I see the change we've made. A lot of the change that has happened has been from people telling their stories, from building allyship, and from helping people understand the impact that these issues have in their own communities. And that's a lot of the work that we're trying to do. We're trying to show people what anti-Semitism looks like today and build allyship and build empathy so that we can work together to address a problem.
You said that beautifully, and I'm so glad I asked that question, because I haven't thought of it in that aspect, and you are so right. I mean, we have, I'm 56, and we've come a long way since I was a teenager, having support in the LGBTQ community, and incredible. When you set out to go to DC for school, what did you think you would be doing?
I thought I'd be a journalist, and I was a journalist. And I had, an enormously exciting journalism career. I, was first started in the Jewish community working for Jewish newspapers, and then that went into covering Congress for a Congressional Quarterly. And then I had, my dream job, which is I got to cover presidential campaigns for NBC News in 2008, and traveled with the different candidates on their buses and on their planes, and, reported from different events. And it was a dream. It was what I'd always wanted to do as a young kid, making newspapers at home. And
did you really?
Oh yeah. I was a total, that's exactly.
I love that. That's amazing.
And so I was really passionate about that and loved it. And, as times changed, and, journalism as an industry has changed so much, I've adapted my skills to other places, and my career has really meandered in amazing ways. And I've, morphed from a journalist to somebody who's focused on crisis communications, to using those skills for Hillel in a community that I care about and issues that I care about. And that's landed me here. And I'm incredibly grateful for that.
And the work you're doing today is impactful, and will have, long lasting ramifications, positive ones, I believe. I think this is a really great campaign. Let's end on Robert Kraft, and then I will say goodbye, but thank you.
My pleasure.
Please post or share the blue square, and we will make a statement to all Americans that together we will beat all hate.
Matthew, thank you so much for spending the time with me and talking about this issue.
My pleasure. It's been a great opportunity, and thank you for your support, and thank you for bringing attention to this campaign and to this issue to so many people.
And seriously, I mean, if there's anything I can do, I really would love to be involved. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Post and share the blue square, just as Robert said.
I plan to, and I wear it on my lapel on my jacket. So thanks so much. You have a great evening.
You too. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you to Matthew Berger for joining us this evening, and for the work he's doing with Robert Kraft for the Foundation to Combat Antisemitism and the Stand Up to Jewish Hate campaign. For more information on the campaign, visit standuptojewishhate.org. As I leave you, remember, we all have choices to make in life. Speak up, do the hard thing, and let's all fight to stop hate in all its forms. I truly believe conversations like this can change the world around us. Please stay tuned for the next conversation.